Hey deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the past few weeks. Let's get to it. Love is Blind, number 86. Megan says, my cousin and his wife play fight a lot like Matt and Colleen. It also makes me uncomfortable. One day I couldn't take it anymore, so I point blank told them that I couldn't tell if their fighting was going to lead to a divorce or a baby, but either way it makes me uncomfortable. 2 babies later, they are still fighting. End of comment. I don't know what's going on with Matt Calling. I don't know what's going on with your cousin your cousin. It's hard to say. You know, some people really have a lot of tolerance with play fighting. One time, so I have a few friends that I went to preschool with, actually, that I'm still friends with, that we've grown up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, went to the same college, lived together, in our 20s when we were renting houses. And so we knew each other very well, very, very well. And we would sometimes bicker in a playful way, but we absolutely knew that we loved each other and would never hate each other or break up our friendship. And occasionally people from the outside, our other friends, would comment on how ruthless we were to each other. Now, it could be argued we were not being kind to each other. And, you know, as always, don't be a jerk face. But I think that sometimes, you know, people have different familiarity or comfort levels with that kind of thing. Having said that, as I said in the video, plenty of people, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships, will engage in play fighting that they frame as play fighting, but is actually passive aggression. It's a way of communicating your hurt and your fears and your anger towards someone through the veil of play fighting. And I imagine for a lot of these relationships where there's a fair amount of this play fighting, that there are times when it is fun and is bonding and healthy, and then there are other times when it's not. So I think from the outside, it's hard to tell. But Megan, getting to your description, I don't know the full extent of the conversation that you had with your cousin, but you said, one day I couldn't take it anymore, so I point blank told them that I couldn't tell if their fighting was going to lead to a divorce or a baby. So, you know, it's hard to know how that went down. But when we communicate with people, the healthiest way is to speak from our own feelings of fear or hurt, right, without being hostile or accusatory, and without also making any assumptions. So one of the actually, me and my wife have friends that are like this, where there's a lot of play fighting, and I can't tell from the outside what's going on the inside. They seem to have a pretty good relationship. They've been together for a long time, and they seem to be functioning pretty well. But there are times when it seems like, ooh, that seemed like that was crossing a line, or what's happening right now. And I've never done this, but if I did, I would go up to them and say, hey, this is not on you, this is me. And so I don't want to accuse, I don't want to assume anything, but I just wanted to say that there are times when you're play fighting, which I think is really fun. I think that provides a lot of levity and entertainment for us. At the same time, there are maybe, I don't know, 3% of the time, it seems like the two of you are kind of going for the jugular with each other. And I just wanted to say that for me, when I watch that, it worries me. I don't want to see the two of you hurting each other or divorcing or something like that. And for me, I feel uncomfortable. That's me. It's not you. So I'm owning my feelings. I'm differentiating. I'm not assuming anything. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying, this is my issue, not yours. I just wanted to tell you that's how I feel about it. You certainly don't have to change your behavior, but if you could either reassure me that it's not heading toward divorce, I would be less worried. Certainly that's not your responsibility, but I care about the two of you, and I guess that's all I wanted to say. You could say something like that, right? All right, Renee says, Brennan and Alexa's holier-than-thou attitude is so obnoxious, end of comment. Yeah, I've seen a lot of comments along these lines. Both Brennan and Alexa are, paradoxically, in the beginning, they were the loved couple because they didn't have the drama or the issues, initially anyway, and seemed genuinely to be in love, and there were no complications to their marriage or before or during or after. It was just, you know, one of those Cameron and what's her name? Lauren and Cam from season 1. But different from Lauren and Cam, although I think maybe people also thought that Lauren and Cam might have been a little holier than thou, but they didn't certainly come across that way. But Brennan and Alexa seem to come across that way to people, and so what's going on there? Well, the temptation is to assume that people that come across as holier than thou or superior or arrogant or something, they are jerk faces, right? But usually, not always, these individuals are either insecure or they were emotionally neglected growing up to some extent, such that they had to shut down their reaction. We have this bias that when people don't have a reaction, we insert thoughts into their mind that they're stuck up. For a classic example is if you're shy and you say you move to a new neighborhood, you're going to a new school, and this would happen all the time when I was a kid, because I grew up in the same neighborhood, so there'd be people occasionally moving in to the neighborhood. They'd start with the school, and if they were quiet, then everyone would assume that they were stuck up. We called them stuck up in the 80s. Do they still use that word? And then we would get to know them and find out that they weren't stuck up at all. They were just shy, or they're at a new school. So there's this assumption that for people, when they don't show a lot of emotion or vulnerability, then they must not have any, or they must be looking down on other people. And certainly that can be the case. But again, usually it's because there's something else going on. They either are shy or they learned a long time ago to be tough, to not show their vulnerability. Imagine if Alexa and Brennan were to show more vulnerability. Like with Brennan, he could break down crying during the one of the things after the season ends and say, hey, a lot of people are coming down on us because we seem like we're holier than thou, and I just want to say, I certainly don't feel that way. I'm just trying to survive on this reality TV show. Or if people were attacking, he could say, I know people are attacking me for defending Alexa and Zeneb and being against Cole and in that situation. And, I just want to say, I don't know the situation. I'm just trying to do right by my wife, and I can only call him as I see him, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Some sort of vulnerability would have, I think, made them more likable. And that's just a guess, but we learn to obscure that vulnerability when we feel like we're not safe to do so. And then people can interpret that as being holier than thou. That's just a guess. All right, Francine says, oh my goodness, Dr. Honda, thank you for validating the moving on process. Thank you. So I was, I think, talking about how we have this pathological societal belief that you have to move on very, very quickly from a breakup or after some loss. And science shows that that is not always the case. There are plenty of normal, healthy cases in which someone would grieve and struggle for years and years and years beyond what common society would consider to be normal. And to shame yourself and to have other people shame us for having those normal feelings actually complicates things and prolongs it. So they say, thank you for validating the moving on process. Thank you also for sharing the story about your friend's 10-month relationship and the 6-year healing that it took. This was something that I needed to hear. There is so much pressure to move on quickly from a relationship and a lot of self-judgment for not doing so. You start to think there is something wrong with you. Hearing this brought some peace. Yeah, end of comment. So I'm glad, Francine, you found some peace. A good heuristic is whatever feeling a human is having, it's probably valid, okay? It's probably coming from somewhere that is logical. That was one of the things that I really discovered in working with humans and getting to know what was going on behind the scenes with everyone, is that because prior to having this revelation, I would see reactions from other people and just think, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you having that reaction? People in public, people in my personal life, people at work. And there's this notion in society that people choose to do that, or they choose to think a certain way, and thus it results in their weird belief or their weird reaction. And certainly those are factors, but the assumption that I run on is whenever I see something that annoys me in another person, I guess in particular, because that's when I'm prone to judging and thinking that they're choosing it, I try to raise the question mark as to if I got to know them, I would understand how they got there. I wouldn't agree with it, and I would say there are other options, but I would understand how they got there, especially when you think about societal influences and political influences and mood influences and trauma, relational trauma, schema influences. Patricia says, am I the only one getting properly triggered when Zeneb keeps repeating, I stand by what I said? Like, you would expect her to have at least some self-reflection after the therapy, after seeing people's reactions to it and watching the TV show. Potentially it is because she surrounds herself with her bubble of support, including Alexa, who applaud her in whatever she does, but it just seems so immature still. End of comment. Yeah, hard to know. I would get, the way Zeneb comes across to me is someone who is deeply shameful, someone who went through a lot, and we know that she went through a lot. Paradoxically, I'll just talk about for myself. When I was in the beginning of my career as a therapist and as a professor, if someone were to criticize me as a therapist or a professor in the very beginning, I had a really hard time with it. I would defend, or I would act like I was being open to what they were saying, but I was being destroyed on the inside. And it would cause me to come across at times as believing like I didn't deserve the criticism, or I was, even though someone knew better, like a supervisor was telling me, hey, I think this, you need to work on this, or you made this mistake or something like that. I would sometimes, not all the time, but I would get defensive, which gave the impression like I knew better or something. And paradoxically, over time, as I became more competent and also more confident in my work as a professor and as a therapist, when someone criticized me, I was much more open and much more willing to accept that they were right about me. So when we have more mistakes and also less confidence, when we should be more open to feedback, honestly, because we need to learn, paradoxically, on average, we're more defensive and more cut off from feedback. So with people, when they are living their lives and they feel very they feel a lack of confidence, and they feel like they're not very competent, and they might not actually be very competent when it comes to self-awareness and relationships and communication, they paradoxically might also be closed to feedback, because when they think about them, when they're acknowledging to themselves and other people that they made a mistake, they plummet through the floor of self-esteem and feel like there's no coming back from that, particularly if you have a lot of relational traumas that Zeneb could have that would make it very, very difficult for her to even entertain the idea that there's something that she did that was wrong, because she would fall into a pit of despair, like there's something deeply wrong. If I made that mistake, then there's something deeply wrong with me, which means all the other attacks and criticism I've received from prior partners is also correct. I'm 100% wrong. No one will ever love me. No one has ever loved me. I'm different from all other humans. People go there, and some of you might know that. So when the idea comes up of like, maybe you did something wrong, there are dire consequences to even entertaining that idea, and so then you just shut it out. I don't know if that's the case with Zeneb, but that's possible. And when you have that perspective, I think it's less triggering. I think it provokes more compassion, right? Love's Blind 87 OIC says, I'm surprised you interpreted the end of that conversation between Brennan and Cole as polite and hopeful. Just chiming in here. Yeah, the conversation, Brennan and Cole, they were making up, and I thought in the end it was polite, and it did provide some hope to their relationship going on. That was clearly Cole giving up because rebuilding a bridge seemed hopeless to him. And Brennan wasn't being polite at all. He was abrasive. I'm confused. Am I missing something? End of comment. Yeah, I mean, it's just, we're all just watching the same thing, and none of us know what's really, quote unquote, happening. So all of us could have a different interpretation of what we saw. So you're not missing anything. It's just you have a different point of view, and what you see is that Brennan wasn't being polite, and that that Cole was just giving in to end the conversation. But I don't know. To me, I guess I was worried that it would blow up. On reality TV, often these things happen, and to me, like it was like if they for whatever reason came into therapy and the two of them wanted to work on their relationship, or were even not wanting, they didn't even know if, well, I got a more common scenario. Let's say that you have two divorced parents and they're done in their relationship, but they worry about their co-parenting system and they come into therapy and there's a lot of contempt and a lot of bad blood between the two of them. If I had a conversation, a first session that was like their conversation, Brennan and Cole, I would definitely be encouraged. I mean, because there's so many other roads that they could have gone down that would have been much more destructive, where they're young. It's a starting point, is my point. That's why I said hopeful. But, you know, everyone's right. No one can know what really happened there. MK Average says, Cole saying that to Alexis, because remember, Cole was like, "You're Alexis's mom," and just kept that. When Cole said that, it gives me more proof that he is just clueless and not actually calculated in his a-hole comments. End of comment. Yeah, it does. It is a tick mark in that column that Cole is oblivious in a lot of social situations, and and you put a couple drinks in him in particular, which I think was true. Love is Blind 89. Marley says, Dr. Kirk's story about how the brain doesn't section off the experience of pranks really struck at the core with me. Yeah, I was talking about how you want to be really careful about how what sort of pranks that you pull on other people, because there can be a span of time before you reveal that it's a prank that where you could legit be traumatizing the other person and reworking their working models. And when you finally reveal that it was a prank, it's possible that it will partially correct for that experience for the person, but not entirely. When I was 10 years old, my mom received a call from a stranger who claimed to have kidnapped me and tortured her with tales of what he was going to do. Oh my God. She never recovered from the trauma for the remaining 15 years of her life and still had tears streaming down her face when she remembered it on her deathbed. I know this isn't the same thing as a prank, but choose your pranks carefully, folks. Yeah. This is a broader topic of what I might call disenfranchised trauma. I don't know if that's a term that other authors have used, but I'm adopting or adapting a term from grief. We have disenfranchised grief, which is a well-researched topic for the past 30 years. It's defined as grief reactions that are normal and are human, but are disenfranchised by society and by social circles. Like if, for example, your spouse dies, it's not likely that people will downplay or minimize or ignore the grief, right? If your spouse dies in a car accident, a lot of people will show remorse and will understand when you don't go to work for a week, for example. Having said that, even in those situations, I think people will minimize the normal amount of grief that someone will go through. But at the very least, if you say, I'm not coming into work today because my spouse died yesterday in a car accident, you're not going to get a lot of people pushing back on that. However, if your pet dies, like your dog or your cat, or other kinds of losses, like if another random one is, say you go through a divorce and then 20 years later, your ex-partner dies for whatever reason. And you could imagine being very affected by that, right? Even if you're not in that much contact with your ex. If you called into work and said, I can't come to work this week because my ex-wife died today and I divorced her 20 years ago, you're not going to get a lot of sympathy in those situations. And so, and we can talk about the nuances of that case by case, but the point is or more specifically, say your dog died tragically, and you called into work and said, I can't come into work today because my dog died. I mean, I think this is shifting. I think Seattleites are pretty likely to honor that, but I don't know if that's an honored thing in all societies. It's certainly not through Seattle entirely. But anyway, point is we call that disenfranchised grief. So we could call another area of disenfranchised trauma where people have legit trauma, like what your mom went through, which it was absolutely traumatizing. It makes total sense. It would be traumatizing. But if she were to talk about it, she'd be like, because I'm guessing what happened was your mom, quickly enough anyway, found out that the person was lying, that you weren't actually kidnapped and being tortured or something. And let's say it was a few hours later. So for a lot of people, they'd be like, well, what's the problem? That was just a prank call, or, someone was just trying to hurt your feelings. Like, your daughter was fine the whole time. Why even a day later, but particularly 15 years later, why are you still struggling with? And thus your mom might have felt like she was shaming herself, or she couldn't talk about it with other people and was never able to process the feelings, this kind of thing. And so it just remains. I don't know that. I mean, I could see someone having a healthy reaction to that trauma and still crying about it 15 years. So I don't know if your mom had complicated grief around that. But there are a lot of things in this category where people don't generally acknowledge trauma in general, right? They will downplay it. They'll say you're weak for having a reaction. They'll say you're weak for having PTSD. And so it's, and they'll point to, I was actually on another podcast, another YouTube channel recently, and they were talking about how they were in an argument with someone that thought that if you were traumatized, in a sexual assault, and you had a better attitude about sexuality, you would not develop PTSD because you were more open sexually or something like that. And basically saying that PTSD is a result of your bad attitude about what happened. And that idea is just so offensive to me, and ridiculous and unscientific and victim blaming. And so, trauma in general is disenfranchised, but I think some things in particular. So could someone be traumatized by a prank? Absolutely. And, just be careful. That's the point. All right, well, let's end it there. And I will do another video where I continue reading people's comments, because this is getting a little long. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.